Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Track 3, What You Need to Build a Disease Community. My name is Robert Austria, and I have the honor of being your host for this next session on partnering with pharmaceutical companies in a changing landscape. As a reminder, this track is being a live stream through our Platform Q partners, and want to welcome our remote attendees. I'd like to welcome Susan Stein, the President and CEO of Connection Healthcare, and Betsey Bogard, Director, Global Research Development, International IFOPA Association. Please join me in welcoming them.
Hello, everyone. We are, I think, the last bit before lunch, so bear with us. So this is the title of our talk is called Partnering with Pharmaceutical Companies in a Changing Landscape. And we're going to discuss how the relationship's evolving and how things are evolving and improving. So I'm the CEO and President of Connection Healthcare. And Connection Healthcare was founded in 1999, actually, as a founder of Connection Healthcare. And we are an award-winning scientific communications company. We only work in rare diseases and oncology. So I actually serve on the board of directors here at this wonderful organization, Global Genes. So very proud to be part of this, as well as some other different types of things. And I'm going to just let Betsey introduce herself.
And I'm Betsey Bogard. I have a brother with a rare disease. This is Judd. He has a rare disease with a very long name, fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva, or FOP. It causes muscles to turn to bone. And this is he and I at Global Genes 2 years ago at the dinner. He'll be back again on Saturday night. And he's the underlying reason why I'm here. The more immediate reason is that my professional work has been at the intersection of patient groups and pharmaceutical companies in a few different roles and with a few different disease communities, and on both the pharmaceutical company side and on the patient group side. I worked on the industry side at Genzyme, where I was for 10 years, and also more recently at Fulcrum Therapeutics, where I've been consulting for the last year. And then on the patient group side at IFOPA, or the International FOP Association, which is the international patient group that supports my brother's disease. And this is really where I'll focus on, is what IFOPA has done to think about its relationships with pharmaceutical companies. So I'll go through a case study of guidelines that we wrote for our relationships with pharmaceutical companies. And first, though, Susan's going to give you some very relevant background on the history of patient advocacy as it relates to these relationships. And then I'll come back and talk about our case study.
So I just wanted to put some context around today's discussion. That is really important to give you a little bit of background. Some of you may be familiar with this, and hopefully this is some news for some of you. So along the way, during the decade of 1973 to 1983, there were only 34 drugs that were developed for orphan diseases. And here's some of the key reasons. There was limited funding, starting on the top left, a lack of researcher interest. There were very few patient groups that were involved, and this has not changed. There's a high cost of development versus the expected return on investment. So in 1983, Ronald Reagan actually signed the Orphan Drug Act, which created multiple incentives for researchers and pharmaceutical companies to be part of the orphan drug movement. So companies that have never really experienced anything in this area were very excited to get into it because there was some legislation now that stimulated some investment. And some of the things that they were able to take a look at, and if you can just kind of think about it, that a lot of these areas were considered unpatentable and certainly unprofitable. And so this legislation really made a big difference in changing that. So on the right-hand side, you can see that there's sponsors that qualify for reduced regulatory fees. They qualify for tax credits of up to 50% of clinical development costs, and they qualify for 7 years of market exclusivity within the approved indications. So what happened then is you'll see since 1983 to 2000, and this is 2015, you can see a nice uptick in what's actually gone on. And this is actually number of approved orphan drugs per year. And I think it's kind of important to know that there's a lot of activity. So even though these are just approved drugs, that doesn't represent all the activity that's actually going on in this area. It's really pretty amazing. But many of the other products that have been designated are not being approved yet. And of course, this happens for a variety of reasons. So I think it's important to talk about here, while we're sitting here saying how can industry and advocates work better together. There's no real better place right now, but in the orphan product development. I mean, it is a challenging marketplace. So even though you're seeing a nice uptick and people are getting involved and they're there, there's still a lot of drugs that are not getting approved. It's a really long process, and it is really, really hard. So I think that, and this is one of the areas where advocacy groups can make a big difference. So just to show you some of the challenges, I mean, we have really small patient populations, so finding patients is really critical and very difficult. And the patients are geographically widespread, so how to access the patients is really another piece that's very, very difficult. Sites are naive sites, so how do we guarantee data integrity? Very sparse natural histories. So what controls do we use? And there's a lot of information out there on clinical trials, and especially in the role of patient registries and also natural history studies, and I certainly urge you to take a look at that. There's a lack of defined biomarkers, so how do we measure activity? Lack of surrogate endpoints, so how can you define success? And then there is a lot of obstacles. I'm looking at all of you out there. There's a lot of obstacles to patient recruitment and retention. So how do we get all that data? And a lot of times it's just awareness. People don't understand that there are actually clinical trials out there. But then, and I'm not telling you anything that you don't know, it's very difficult in rare diseases just to manage your disease on a day-to-day basis. So then to take the time out to travel to sites and get things done is really a challenge, and I understand that, but it is a challenge for the entire industry as well. So as patient advocacy groups evolve and gain in sophistication, I think the future is to see a lot more trending of patient advocacy groups getting involved in clinical trial development. And there's a talk tomorrow at 2 o'clock on patient engagement in clinical trials tomorrow afternoon if you wanted to go ahead and do that. So the important part of all this is that 95% of rare diseases don't have a single FDA approved drug. And I'm not just talking treatment. I'm talking, they don't have, I'm not talking a cure, really. I'm talking about an approved drug for treatment, and that's a big issue. So 95% is a large deal. And then probably a good half of the 7,000 diseases don't even have an advocacy group attached to it. So we're talking no Facebook pages or any real challengers in there. There's a lot of room for work here. So I wanted to talk more about how patient advocates can work together with industry, and that's basically the crux of our conversation today. So I really wanted to talk about more how we can get more patient advocacy groups to be important stakeholders at the table. And we all know all the statistics. They're pretty grim, but as a public health effort, this is a big one. 30 million people in the United States, 350 million worldwide of rare disease patients. And just to put that into some level of context and some perspective, if all the people with rare diseases lived in one place, it would be the third most populous country. So as a public health issue, this is definitely something to be looking at. I thought it was kind of interesting, too, as a statistic, that 80% of all rare disease patients are affected by about 350 diseases. So about 350 of the 7,000 are really where 80% of the patients lie. I hope that's not too many numbers that I just threw at you there. But I think it's really important because it gives us something to focus on. And it's so the data is sort of skewed because those 350 really take up a majority of it. So here are some common goals, and I think this is critical because the one thing with industry right now with pharmaceutical companies and biotech companies is if they can work together with patient groups, we really got something here. The goals are the same. They really want to talk about some of these big issues. So some of the issues and the goals are obviously, and this is just a short list, but obviously conquest of the disease. Both groups want streamlined research policies and procedures. Both are looking for minimizing time to approval while maintaining high research standards. Both are looking for ethical conduct of research, maximizing patient care, quality of life, and survivorship, and obviously reasonable risk-benefit assessments. And I know we'll probably talk a lot about the Sarepta program and DMD, and that was a perfect example of what patients are willing to risk as opposed to regular, more traditional drugs. So next we're going to discuss more about what these two groups specifically want from each other. And the data on the following slides is taken from multiple sources and surveys that are addressing better collaboration for the advancement of patient care. So industry needs from patients. Pharmaceutical and biotech companies need from patients input, access, and data. With their innate understanding of patients, they're best to advise the industry. And the FDA really wants to hear what is clinically meaningful to patients. So I won't read all of this here, but under input, just a few things that are important is what is the best inclusion-exclusion criteria? Meaningful outcomes measures. What's important in the day-to-day life to patients, not necessarily just for scientific studies. Need input on burden, on minimizing strategies for reducing burdens, recruitment strategies. And then under access, pharmaceutical and biotech companies, the industry needs really access to qualified patients, to appropriate sites, and to referral networks. And under data, pre-screen patients who pre-identify as being interested in clinical trials, natural history data, and assessment training and utilization. Patient advocacy groups, well, I don't need to tell you this. They want a real solid seat at the table. And this is important. They want to be major stakeholders as a representative of the patient voice. They want involvement, partnership, and respect. Under involvement is asking, more transparency. Tell me, let's work on this as partners. I mean, we've come a long way from what it used to be, where patient advocacy groups were on the bottom end of the power. Now they can really take a major seat at the stakeholder table. It used to be that pharmaceutical and biotech companies, not trying to be horrible people, but they had work to get done, and they needed patient advocacy groups to do that. And now they've learned, and everybody's learned, that working better with better collaboration is actually better for patients and advancing patient care. So that union is really important because pharmaceutical companies work in what they do all day long, and patient advocates work what they do all day long, and that combination is critical. So involvement is the transparency and involving what is the protocol design. Getting involved in patient registries is critical, and understanding the clinical development plan. They want partnerships with key opinion leaders. They want supportive advocacy group relationship within the community. They want much more transparent communications. And they want, support for additional community assistance. And they want respect. They want industry to understand how advocacy groups are structured and their resourcing levels. And also understanding what do they have. They hold so much information in terms of patient registry and natural history data. They're perfect partners to be able to put these together. And it's critical, not just in being able to have patient care, but in clinical trial development. I mean, it's just really critical. And they want compassion and true commitment to the community. So don't just say that you're here because you have a drug to sell, but really, what are you doing to help the community as a whole? And they want adherence to ethical principles of interaction with advocacy groups. So this actually is straight from an Inventive survey. And it's kind of interesting. You could probably find this. I'm sorry I didn't put the reference at the bottom. you can always ask me. It's straight from a survey, and it was asking what patient advocates seek from pharmaceutical partners, and then how the groups themselves understand their evolving responsibilities towards industry partners. So this is what patient advocates are saying that how the pharmaceutical industry can better serve. So improving transparency and authenticity was number one. Seeking input in the design and execution of clinical trials. Involving us in awareness and educational campaigns for patients. Providing follow-up when meetings are convened to seek our counsel on unmet needs. So that goes to the point of, great, we went there, we did all this wonderful, good talking, good meeting, everything was great. Now what? They want that feedback loop to continue. And then using requests for proposal for grant giving process to reward collaboration among patient groups, not competition. And what do they see that they could do better in this relationship is be much more clear about what lines we aren't willing to cross. To behave more like a business, meeting our commitments in a timely fashion. So that goes to some things that you talk about in just relationships in general and negotiation is just understanding, industry works as a business. And in order to have that seat at the table, then you have to have that same sort of mentality that this is your business too. And so then both of you can work really well together. This is coming from advocacy saying what they can do better. Staying focused on the core mission and avoid initiating programs simply to chase more funding. Frequently report back to funders on the impact of dollars raised and spent, and establish more patient registries that pharma can use for for trial development. So this kind of leads me to something. I'm actually curious about this. So as a relationship, as this relationship continues to evolve, the concept of what is appropriate between pharmaceutical companies and industry and patient organizations keeps coming up. What's appropriate? Where does these lines? You even saw people were talking about lines they weren't willing to cross. So Betsey's going to go into this a lot further, but I was really curious, just as a show of hands, just asking, are there published guidelines for how industry and advocacy groups should interact? So show of hands, yes, the guidelines exist in US and Europe. Yes, in the US, but not in Europe. Yes, in Europe, but not in the US. And no, none exist. Okay, I didn't get everyone's hand, I'm sure, on that, but we'll move forward. But even from the sparse hands, it looked like most people were saying yes in Europe, but not in the US. And that is actually correct. So here's a screenshot of the document that actually does exist in Europe and in the US. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. So this is the EF, that's that. It's the EFPIA. And what they do, they're the representative body of the pharmaceutical industry in Europe. And its primary mission is to promote technological and economic development as well as bringing products to market. So along the way, the group realized they recognized the common interests with patient organizations, and they created this code of practice to ensure that the relationships were conducted in an ethical and a transparent manner. And basically, the code is built upon 5 principles, which are outlined here. So one is the independence of patient organizations in terms of their political judgment, policies, activities shall be assured. 2 is all partnerships between patient organizations and the pharmaceutical industry shall be based on mutual respect, with the views and decisions of each partner having equal value. The pharmaceutical industry shall not request, nor shall patient organizations undertake the promotion of any particular prescription-only medicine. The objectives and the scope of any partnership shall be transparent. The pharmaceutical industry welcomes broad funding of patient organizations from multiple sources. So that is what's going on in Europe. Now, there is something in the United States, and this is what it looks like. And by the way, this is the entire document. So this is from Pharma, and this is the principles on interactions with patient organizations. So I don't know about you, but that does not look like a whole good guidance for me. I mean, I think it's a start, and I think it's great that we have something here, but it looks more of a brochure to me. So what I'm going to do now is I'd like to hand this over to Betsey to talk a little bit more about what she has done within her own organization. So a really nice case study about what she has done, because there is a lack of guidelines here in the United States. And so because there was such a lack, Betsey put it upon herself and her organization, their organization, to put together some guidelines. And then she's going to talk about how we're going to intend to work with Global Genes to put together a more comprehensive document that will be able to be used by all of you. Thank you.
Great. Do you have the clicker? So I'll share a little bit about how we at IFOPA address this challenge of not having very clear guidelines. As Susan described, there are some guidance documents, and those were great, but we found that they really didn't answer all of the things that we were grappling with on a day-to-day basis. I first just want to give you some brief context on our community. I know that we are all rare, but every community is a little bit different. We are a tiny community. We know of 800 individuals with FOP around the world. We're also a very well-connected community. We have one international patient organization, ours, IFOPA, and we also have about 20 national FOP organizations in countries around the world, and we're well-connected with them. So we're small and we're very well connected, and rare is so often a challenge, but in this case it allows us to be very unified, and that's been helpful in this kind of a situation where we're trying to agree on how we want to be partners. We don't have a treatment for our disease, but we do have a lot of companies working really hard on potential therapies. Our organization has a 27-year history of very successful funding of academic research that led to the gene discovery for our disease in 2006, which in turn led to the beginning of what we call our clinical trials era in 2014. And it's been a time of rapid growth and evolution for us. If you look at our drug development landscape just 5 years ago in 2011, it was really just us and the academic researchers. We didn't know of drug companies that were actively working on potential therapies for our disease. And if you look at this same landscape today, it's very different. And we are really, really lucky to have a lot of really wonderful companies thinking about therapies for FOP and driving them forward into clinical trials. We jumped right into clinical trials with a phase 2 program, a repurposed compound. We did not have the luxury of a sort of a ramp up through a drug discovery program to know that clinical trials were coming. It really happened very quickly for us. In 2011, our board was thinking about how they would be able, how they might need to one day raise the $1 million they thought they would need to field a clinical trial themselves. They didn't ever imagine there would be a pharmaceutical company, much less multiple, working on our disease. So it's been a lot of growth and a lot of evolution, and we had to really quickly figure out how we were going to work with companies that range in size from small biotech startups to bigger biotechs to even larger pharma. Now, I felt like coming from Genzyme, where I'd been for 10 years, which is a company that really does partnership with patient groups really well, and rightly so takes a lot of pride in that. I felt pretty confident in knowing how this was going to work and how we were going to be partners. But I found as I left the walls of Genzyme that the world was in fact much more complicated. There are many different ways of partnering, people with many different backgrounds and many different ideas about how to do this. And I found myself often in conversations where we were trying to grapple with how to handle a particular issue in our relationships with companies. And I would say, well, here's maybe how I think we should do it. And someone would say, well, why? You know, either someone within our own organization or someone at a company. I'd say, well, I think it's best practice for these reasons. And they would say, well, great, how do you know it's best practice? Where is it written down? And I would say, well, hold on, let me go look. I'll go find where it's documented so that we can, have something to lean on. And what I found was it wasn't written down anywhere how to handle these day-to-day interactions and what some of the implications of our choices might be and what really is best practice. So we decided that what we needed to do was write this down for ourselves. So I'll share, so one last note before I share our guidelines. So these relationships between patient groups and pharmaceutical companies are really, really important. And they're also really, really complicated. They're happening in the environment of the highly regulated pharmaceutical industry. And they're happening with really high stakes on both sides of the equation. very high business stakes for pharmaceutical companies and incredibly high personal stakes for the patient groups on the other side. There's nothing more important and complex than thinking about saving someone's children or a loved one or yourself. So these are important and they're complicated, and anything that important and that complicated really needs clarity and definition. So there were a few fundamental principles that underlie our guidelines. So one is that we want therapies, and we want therapies that best meet patient needs, and this is why we're in these partnerships. Pharmaceutical companies certainly can go about developing drugs without partnering with us, but we don't think that's in the best interest of our patients. We think that having a seat at the table and being in dialogue with companies will let us have therapies that best meet needs and let us have them as quickly and efficiently as possible. So we really want to be in these relationships. It's also essential that we maintain our independence and our objectivity. We are the sole stakeholder in the arena of drug development that can really represent the patient voice objectively. Doctors can't truly do it. They have some of their own perspectives, and pharmaceutical companies can't do it. And if we can't maintain our independence and objectivity, we're really failing in our core function. And we require the highest level of ethical conduct from us and from our partners. We wrote our guidelines to cover 5 areas, and I'll walk through what these are and a little bit about what they say. And I'll say up front that this is what we've chosen as our community to do, and there are other ways to do it. I think what's most important is just to define how you want to do it. It's important to just have clarity on how you want this relationships to work. And we did just post these guidelines on our website, so they're public. I'll show you our website address at the end in case you want to see them in full. And like so many things in our rare disease world, there is a parent at the beginning of this, a very smart parent who said, we need to have these guidelines. And there are people here in the room on both the IFOPA side and on the industry side that have really helped inform these. There are a lot of great people contributing to what these look like. So our first area is in identifying and engaging drug developers. So we explicitly say that we do want to engage drug developers. I think there may be some people who still question whether patient groups should be talking directly to pharmaceutical companies. We feel very clearly that we should be, and we want to be very explicit about that. And when we do it, it is to have mutually beneficial dialogue. In the last session, this wording was used as well. And for us, this means that we're sharing something with the drug developer, something about who we are, what we bring to the table, sharing community-wide insights when we can. And we also want to have information back from the drug developer, something about what they're working on and what their intentions are with FOP. And we also can take it one step further and collaborate with companies that we understand to be conducting ethical, responsible research. We also reserve the right to not work with companies if we don't have that insight or comfort around the work that they're doing. Our second area is providing patient voice to drug development. And this is one of the harder areas because it really needs to strike the balance between our role in protecting the rights of the community as a whole with protecting rights of individuals and not interfering with the rights of individuals. We as an organization encourage and enable direct dialogue between companies and individual patients. We've seen firsthand how important this is for both the companies and the patients to have this kind of dialogue. It is irreplaceable and so important. We also think there are a couple ways that it can be done, alone or in combination, depending on the scenarios, that best support the whole community. And one of them is that if a company really needs insight on a disease, what it's like to live with the disease, or how patients, how a clinical trial protocol, for instance, might be feasible for patients. We think this is best done with a group of patients, a small panel, an advisory board, rather than with one-on-one input. And we also believe that the patient group should be aware of or involved in some way in this dialogue so that they understand what's happening. And both of these approaches can help ensure that a pharmaceutical company is getting adequate and representative input from the community. It can help ensure transparency and fairness within the patient community. It can help avoid misunderstanding in the dialogue, which can easily arise. It helps address this power imbalance that we've talked to and Susan referred to between pharmaceutical companies and individual patients. And it can help the patient group learn so that they can better support both the patients that they serve and the pharmaceutical companies. And I think that there are a number of ways that this can be done that can be thoughtful and a good approach to maintaining relationships in a complex environment without feeling controlling or being controlling. Our third area is receiving funding. Funding is incredibly important for any organization. It is especially precious for a nonprofit. And the demands on a patient organization go up when your community moves into a clinical trial era or even beyond that. So we receive funding from pharmaceutical companies, and we receive it in two ways. One is as unrestricted funding, ideally on an annual basis, or as sponsorship of a specific activity that we initiate. And the important part is that this is work that we initiate, that we choose, so that we are driving the work that we're doing and what activities we undertake. That is what is most important about funding, and where the principle of needing to maintain our independence and objectivity really comes into practical terms. So we want funding requests to be initiated by writing from us. We think that industry funding should be named and not anonymous. And we've chosen that we don't want our leadership to operate as paid service providers, meaning if a company needs some work done, that they're not engaging some of our leadership in a sort of a paid service role or consulting role. If somebody wants to have that relationship, they should not also be leading our organization. Our fourth area is our role as an organization in clinical trials, which we really define as facilitating communication or enabling informed decision-making. So we will share information with our community about clinical trials, as long as we understand that clinical trial is being conducted by, in an ethical manner that's responsible according to international regulatory standards. We don't add commentary to that. We don't post clinical trial information and say, this is an awesome trial, you all should enroll in it. We just say, here's a trial, here's the information about it. We want to help you understand it so that you can make an informed decision about participating. Choosing to be in a clinical trial is an incredibly important and personal decision. And so we see our job as just helping our patients make that decision and helping them find the answers to the questions that they have. We will in turn share information back with pharmaceutical companies, community-wide observations. For instance, if a particular aspect of a clinical trial turns out to really not be working for a lot of patients, and we're hearing that on social media, we can give that information back to them in case they can improve or change their trial. We discourage the use of social media for people in a trial. We don't think it's a good idea for trial participants to be posting their experience on social media for reasons of personal privacy and the integrity of the trial. But we also don't direct it. It really is ultimately up to the patient to make that choice, and it can put us in an awkward situation and in a place we don't want to be trying to direct that. And we ask that leaders of our organization keep this in mind, even when they're writing in personal blogs or in sort of an individual way, because we're so rare and we're so small, it's really hard to separate out someone's role as a parent versus their role in our organization. And it's really hard for us as an organization to be trying to take a neutral stance on a trial and then have some of our leadership out really encouraging people to enroll in that same trial. And lastly, is patient privacy. So we take our responsibility to protect patient privacy very seriously, of course. We don't disclose the town or state in which a patient lives because that can uniquely identify a patient with a disease as rare as FOP. And we ask that pharmaceutical companies collecting personal health data, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, that be guided by a protocol approved by an ethics committee, and that they not be storing patient identifiers along with that health data. So we just posted our guidelines for our wider FOP community to see, and we're looking forward to hearing how they how they're received. We think of this as a first version to put out there. We are constantly evolving. We know that there are other ways to partner. So we look forward to questions and comments that you might have here. As Susan mentioned, we're also organizing a roundtable so that we can help these evolve in a next step to something that might be more widely useful for the whole rare disease community.
So just in summary, and then we'll open it up to some questions that you may have, but rare disease therapeutic research has increased significantly since 1983, certainly since the introduction of the orphan drug legislation. The regular changes will enhance the role of patient engagement and representation in the review and approval processes. The industry and patient advocacy organizations are, this is an understatement, positioned to collaborate with each other to meet these increasing engagement expectations. And again, another understatement, patient advocacy organizations have much to offer in terms of design and implementation of rare disease clinical research, amongst many other things in there. Just a big group to be able to lean on. And then I think this part is just really important, and I think we would agree that this might be the most important part of our summary, is that these groups need to engage in ongoing dialogue to ensure that we're both working across the spectrum to maintain mutually beneficial and ethical relationships. So with that, I will open it up to questions, and I want to thank you very much for attending.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Gina. I'm with the Alport Syndrome Foundation. First, I wanted to say please add ASF to the list of groups that would like to join your roundtable to work on those guidelines, because this is exactly where we are as an organization, is putting those together. I just had a quick question about the surveys that you had cited. Is there a place where I can find access to those surveys and maybe be able to cite them in our communications?
Yes, we'll put together a list of some of those surveys that we looked at. Most of them are just very brief surveys, but I think they're important. They give a good trend of what's going on out there. But certainly.
Hi, good morning. Sorry. My name is Lori, and I actually work in industry. And one thing that I just wanted to mention that I haven't heard a lot of conversation about is with regard to access to treatments once they are approved. It's very, very exciting to me for the patient community to be involved in the whole process through drug development. But everybody needs to understand, especially for rare disease, that development comes with a price tag. And so when the therapy does come out and it is on the market, we have to be concerned with access to that treatment and who's going to pay for it, and payers paying it and so forth. And it's a very, very complicated issue, but continuing to work with patient advocacy groups beyond the approval and continuing that relationship is really, really critically important, because there could be frustrations within the community that we finally have this wonderful treatment that's, shed some hope, but then how do patients how do they get it paid? Your help is critical to making that successful.
I know that wasn't a question, but I'll just have a comment on that, because I think it is a really important statement. And I know we did talk a lot about sort of the development process, but I know Global Genes were working on something on just diagnostics. How do you get access to diagnostic testing, just so that we can get a better handle of when people can get diagnosed, and can we get patients to get diagnosed sooner. So anywhere from the diagnostic odyssey, which is certainly a real problem in rare diseases, all the way through to patient materials, I think is a critical place that patient advocacy organizations can play a role. And certainly access to therapeutic options is really important.
Hi, over here. When you say that you identify and engage industry, our agency is just now in that stage. Who do you call?
That's a good question. I think it's often, so it's likely to be early in development, right? They're just some company emerging on the scene. So it's probably going to be, maybe a scientist who's published something, or somebody from that early science team. And I'm trying to think how we know that they're there. But it's a little bit of whoever you can reach. Go up, Maureen. DDF. Oh yes, DDF. So so we host a meeting. We host a drug development meeting, and make that known. So that also sometimes will draw people out, and they'll see us and they'll say, oh, we actually have some interest in FOP, and we'll say, great, we'd love to talk to you. Like, tell us a little bit about what you're doing. So, yeah, does anyone have any other ideas? Yeah.
Tom, you want to talk?
Oh, hold on. Mute the mic. They can't hear you on the live stream.
So when data is published, read up on the publications that are becoming available. And when data is published, when they say reach out to investigators, it's really easy to do so, because usually a corresponding author will be listed in the publication, and he or she will have contact information. So it may not be the best way to reach a pharma company or industry, but at least it's a path forward through one of their investigators.
Alan, you want to go? Alan?
I get emails all the time when patients read, and they just go through the corporate website, and it gets booted to me, and I can easily reach out. So look at the company's website.
Next question.
Here.
Hi, I'm Mary Cobb. I'm on the board of the Phelan-McDermott Syndrome Foundation and also consult with industry. I think this kind of input, first of all, I want to congratulate you on the work that you did. I'm one of the ones who raised my hand and said that we had U.S. guidelines because we had the pharma guidelines, but clearly they're not in the kind of detail that are really necessary. And having fielded many, many calls from patient group leaders who are saying, what's an appropriate way to interact with industry? I want to congratulate you on this work. And I think that a lot of these questions, what I'm seeing, they could be really useful in kind of like, as you're talking about, doing a workshop where is collecting additional types of questions that, because, and that whole thing about where do I start? How do I call a company? And it's not an easy task about how do you, but anyway, congratulations, and I think this is a great step forward.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think we have one more over here. Question. Very nice. Yes.
I just wanted to say one of the groups to contact, and even early stages patient advocacy. So a lot of pharma companies now have actual patient advocacy groups on their side as well that really bridge the gap between patient advocacy groups and the pharmaceutical company and the different departments within the pharmaceutical company that may need to engage or may want to engage. So just like Alan said, if you look on the website, often if you go to the who's in the company, there is someone who is part of their responsibility or their sole responsibility is patient advocacy.
Yeah, I think that's good. So one of the things I was going to say, if there is not a lot of companies have patient advocacy groups early on, or patient advocacy context early on. If they do, that's fantastic. But I would just encourage you to be a really diligent detective. Just kind of get on and start somewhere. And usually if you try to reach somebody, they may not get back to you, they may, but somebody's going to respond to you. And your voice is really important. I think any company that's in development at this point recognizes that. If they don't, they're not going to get very far. But I think most companies recognize that that patient voice is really, really critical, and they want to hear from you. So if you have something to share, find a person that'll speak to you.
Yes, my name is Jose Morales. I'm with the Cystinosis Research Network. My experience is that these pharmaceutical companies are actually pretty well regulated, obviously, and they have compliance officers and that govern the relationships, that tell them what they can and can't do. And part of it is to protect the company, but also to protect the patient advocacies and the patients and groups and those sort of things. So it's not as open and clearly as what I'll call a greenfield. What I have found is that there's actually a significant amount of infrastructure that companies have. And the real challenge then becomes, how do you navigate that effectively as an organization? Mm-hmm. And if you're on a board, then what are the the limitations or the exposure that you might take as an organization, because you do have to have a eyes wide open approach, because it's not, as you indicated in your presentation, it's not just one way. And, and there's always, underneath all that, there's the business objectives that need to be fulfilled and met.
That's right. And I agree with you. I will say I think the earlier companies are smaller, the smaller they are, the less they tend to have such clear compliance guidance. It's emerging for them. They're learning as they go and figuring out their way. So, yeah.
We have time for one more question.
Oh, I don't really have a question. I have a statement. If somebody has a question, they can take it, but I will do this really quick. My name is Drew Vandergrift, and I'm from industry, and I just wanted to say thanks because I am in charge of patient advocacy groups at my company. It's a small biotech, and what you said here today is just phenomenal because as I reach out, it is difficult to sometimes help a patient group understand why they should work with pharma. And yeah, there are some pharmas that are going to do some things that are a little different. I don't want to say the word dirty, but they're going to act in a way that may not be having really the patient's best interest at heart. So I appreciate those guidelines. And the other question, when you ask, where do you start? Go to the website. The company wants to know, and they want the world to know that we're working with you and you're working with us. So you will find it pretty regular. I'm in oncology, but you'll find it on a regular basis if you look through their website who they're partnering with, because companies want to let people know what they're working with.
No, just adding. One other way to contact companies might be, especially young companies, they typically have a pretty good social media presence. So tweet at one of their employees, and typically they're very, everyone's concerned about their public image and they want to do right by patient groups as well. So that'll promote a response.
Okay, question, last question. Anybody have it?
This is really to answer the question, girls, great job, on you are surrounded by individuals who work as patient advocates in life sciences in the function in many biotech and pharma companies. I am sitting between two of them right now. So take the opportunity to read name badges and look around because your contact to companies are sitting right next to you. Most companies will not have them listed on the who's who page in their leadership. You have to find them. But I'm telling you, the next 2 days, you're going to find them.